If you can buy this dealership, I'll quit right now. The words cracked through the showroom like a starter pistol, sharp enough to pull every eye away from the rows of exotic cars gleaming beneath the afternoon lights. For a heartbeat, the entire building seemed to hold its breath. Then came the laughter. Sales associates smirked behind polished desks. A couple browsing near a pearl-white Lamborghini exchanged amused glances. Even a receptionist near the glass entrance lowered her head to hide a grin. Standing in the center of it all was Darius Coleman, a tall black man wearing faded jeans, a simple charcoal polo, and worn brown shoes that looked as though they had traveled more highways than luxury parking garages. Across from him stood Ethan Whitmore, the dealership's general manager, his tailored navy suit fitting perfectly beneath the bright showroom lighting. Ethan folded his arms and smiled as if he had already won an argument no one else had heard. Around them, millions of dollars in supercars reflected across polished marble floors. Red Ferraris, black McLarens, silver Lamborghinis, and a limited edition Bugatti sat beneath spotlights like pieces of modern art. The scent of fresh leather drifted through the air, mixed with the faint aroma of coffee from the customer lounge. Darius didn't react to the laughter. He simply looked at Ethan with calm eyes. That was what bothered Ethan most. Most people would have looked embarrassed. Most people would have tried to explain themselves. Most people would have walked away. But Darius remained still, as steady as a statue placed in the center of the showroom. Minutes earlier, he had been quietly examining a rare Ferrari near the front display. He hadn't taken photos. He hadn't asked for a brochure. He hadn't talked about horsepower or top speed. Instead, he had asked a question that immediately changed the atmosphere. He wanted information about the dealership itself. Ownership structure. Expansion plans. Long-term valuation. The question sounded out of place coming from a man Ethan assumed couldn't afford the vehicle he was standing next to. That assumption hardened into certainty the moment Ethan noticed the lack of designer labels, luxury accessories, or any of the signals he associated with wealth. Now Ethan's challenge hung in the air for everyone to hear. If you can buy this dealership, I'll quit. More laughter followed. A salesman leaned against a Porsche and shook his head. Someone whispered that the manager had ended the conversation for good. Through the massive showroom windows, sunlight poured across the floor, creating golden reflections along the curves of the cars. Darius slowly turned his gaze toward the Lamborghini display nearby. The yellow paint shimmered beneath the light. For a brief moment, he seemed completely uninterested in the crowd surrounding him. His expression revealed nothing. No anger. No frustration. No need to prove himself. Ethan noticed it too. The manager's smile remained, but something about the silence felt strange. It was the kind of silence that arrives before a storm, when the air changes even though the sky still looks clear. Darius finally looked back at him. Then, in a calm voice that barely rose above the hum of the showroom, he asked a simple question. Are you absolutely certain that's your final answer? Darius held Ethan Whitmore's gaze for another second, then slowly nodded as if committing the answer to memory. The laughter around them faded into scattered murmurs. Most people expected a comeback. Others expected him to leave. Instead, he simply turned away and began walking deeper into the showroom. His footsteps echoed softly across the polished marble floor. Behind him, Ethan let out a short laugh and shook his head before returning to a group of sales associates who seemed eager to congratulate him for putting an end to what they viewed as a ridiculous conversation. Darius paid none of it any attention. He moved past a row of Ferraris lined beneath bright white lights. Their flawless paint reflected across the floor like liquid glass. He paused beside a black McLaren and rested his hand lightly against the cool edge of the display barrier. The car itself was not what interested him. It was the environment around it. The spacing between displays. The customer traffic patterns. The condition of the facility. The energy of the staff. He noticed everything. Years of experience had trained him to see details others ignored. A young salesman watched him from several yards away. Unlike the others, he was not laughing. His name tag read Tyler Brooks. He looked no older than 23. After hesitating for several moments, he finally approached. "Sir, is there anything I can help you with?" The question sounded sincere. Darius glanced toward him and offered a small smile. "Actually, yes." Tyler seemed relieved. "What would you like to know?" Darius gestured toward the showroom. "How long have you worked here?" The question caught Tyler off guard. "Almost a year." "Do you enjoy it?" Tyler hesitated before answering. "Most days." Darius nodded slowly. The answer told him more than a rehearsed sales pitch ever could. Across the showroom, Ethan was speaking with a wealthy couple near a silver Lamborghini. Every few moments his eyes drifted back toward Darius. There was confidence in the manager's posture, but also curiosity. Something about the encounter continued to bother him. Darius looked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows at the front of the building. Outside, traffic moved steadily beneath the warm afternoon sun. Luxury vehicles entered and exited the parking lot. Customers arrived expecting status, attention, and prestige. Yet inside the building, respect seemed to depend on appearance before anything else. Tyler shifted nervously. "Can I ask you something?" Darius folded his hands comfortably. "Of course. Why were you asking about ownership records?" Darius looked toward the distant sales offices lining the second floor. Glass walls overlooked the entire showroom from above. Because sometimes the most valuable thing in a building is not what sits on the floor. Tyler followed his gaze but did not fully understand. Before he could ask another question, movement near the entrance drew attention across the showroom. Two executives in dark business attire entered through the glass doors. Several employees immediately straightened their posture. Ethan noticed them as well. His confident expression shifted slightly. The visitors were not customers. Their tailored suits and leather portfolios suggested something entirely different. One of the receptionists quickly picked up a phone. Ethan excused himself from his conversation and headed toward the front. Darius watched quietly. The showroom's atmosphere changed in a subtle but unmistakable way. Conversation softened. Smiles became more professional. Employees exchanged uncertain looks. Tyler glanced between the newcomers and Darius. "Do you know them?" he asked. Darius remained calm. "Not yet." Then he checked the time, looked toward the entrance once more, and quietly added, "But I think I am about to." The two executives moved across the showroom with the quiet confidence of people accustomed to being welcomed wherever they went. Their polished shoes clicked softly against the marble floor as they approached the reception desk. One carried a black leather portfolio. The other held a tablet displaying charts and documents. Ethan Whitmore reached them before anyone else could. His smile appeared instantly, professional and practiced. He extended his hand and introduced himself, eager to establish control of the situation. The taller executive shook his hand politely but briefly. His attention seemed focused elsewhere. Around the showroom, employees pretended to continue working while secretly watching. Tyler Brooks noticed the same thing Darius noticed. The visitors were scanning the building. Not admiring the cars. Not shopping. Evaluating. Their eyes moved from the displays to the customer areas, then toward the offices overlooking the floor. Ethan spoke confidently, gesturing toward the rows of Ferraris and Lamborghinis as though delivering a presentation. The taller executive listened without expression. The second executive occasionally tapped notes into his tablet. Darius remained beside the black McLaren, observing quietly. He noticed a small crack in a display base near the entrance. He noticed dust gathering along a ventilation grill above the service corridor. He noticed employees standing straighter whenever Ethan looked their direction and relaxing the moment he turned away. Small details often revealed bigger truths. Tyler shifted closer. Something feels strange, he said under his breath. Darius nodded slightly. People reveal themselves when they think nobody important is watching. Across the showroom, Ethan continued speaking. His voice carried confidently through the open space. He discussed monthly sales figures, customer loyalty, and future growth. The words sounded impressive. Yet every few moments his eyes drifted toward Darius. The manager still seemed bothered by his presence. Eventually the taller executive interrupted him. Before we continue, there is someone we need to meet. Ethan blinked. Of course. Who would that be? The executive glanced across the showroom. Several employees followed his gaze. Ethan followed it too. His expression tightened almost immediately. The executive was looking directly at Darius. A faint murmur spread among the staff. Tyler straightened. Ethan forced a laugh. You mean him? The executive did not laugh. Yes. Silence settled over the showroom. Ethan hesitated before leading the visitors toward the center display area. With every step, curiosity spread through the building. Conversations stopped. Customers looked up from brochures. Even the receptionist paused her work. Darius remained calm as the group approached. Reflections from the nearby Ferrari danced across the polished floor around him. The taller executive arrived first. Without hesitation, he extended his hand. Good afternoon, Mr. Coleman. Sorry for the delay. The atmosphere changed instantly. Tyler's eyes widened. Several sales associates exchanged confused glances. Ethan's smile froze. Darius shook the man's hand. Not a problem, Richard. Richard nodded respectfully. Our legal team has completed the preliminary review. We brought the updated numbers. He handed over the leather portfolio. Darius accepted it casually, as though receiving routine paperwork. Ethan stared at the exchange. Something was no longer fitting the story he had built in his head. Richard continued. The acquisition analysis is stronger than expected. The dealership appears valuable despite several operational concerns. The last words hung in the air. Operational concerns. Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach. Darius opened the portfolio and calmly reviewed the documents while dozens of eyes remained fixed on him. Then he looked up, his expression unchanged, and asked the question that made the entire showroom fall silent. Tell me honestly, Richard. Based on everything your team found today, is this dealership still worth buying? Richard glanced down at the tablet in his hand before answering. The silence inside the showroom felt heavier than before. Even the customers who had arrived to admire exotic cars now stood quietly, watching a completely different kind of performance unfold. Sunlight spilled across the polished floor, reflecting from the curved bodies of Ferraris and Lamborghinis like ripples of gold. Richard finally looked up. Yes, it is still worth buying. But only if the leadership problems are addressed immediately. The words landed with surprising force. Several employees lowered their eyes. Ethan Whitmore felt every gaze in the room shift toward him, even though nobody spoke his name. Darius closed the portfolio and held it comfortably beneath one arm. His expression remained calm. He did not appear victorious. He did not appear angry. He simply appeared focused. Richard continued. Our review identified strong inventory performance and a valuable location. However, we also documented customer complaints, employee turnover issues, and management decisions that may be affecting long-term growth. Ethan forced a smile. I think there may be some misunderstanding. Richard turned toward him. Everything in the report is documented. The manager's smile faded. Around the showroom, the atmosphere became increasingly uncomfortable. Tyler Brooks stood near the McLaren display, listening carefully. For the first time since joining the dealership, he felt as though someone was finally seeing what happened behind the polished image presented to customers. Darius slowly walked toward a nearby Ferrari. The deep red paint reflected across his face as he studied the vehicle for a moment. Then he turned back toward Richard. What about the staff? Richard checked another page. Several employees received excellent evaluations. Particularly younger sales personnel who maintained strong customer satisfaction scores despite difficult working conditions. Tyler blinked in surprise. Ethan looked away. Darius noticed both reactions. He noticed everything. That was one reason he had built successful businesses. Numbers mattered. Buildings mattered. Inventory mattered. But people mattered more. A dealership could survive a slow quarter. It could survive economic uncertainty. What it could not survive was a culture built on arrogance and disrespect. Darius stepped toward the center of the showroom. The entire room seemed drawn toward him. How long have negotiations remained confidential? He asked. Richard answered immediately. Almost 6 weeks. A murmur moved through the employees. 6 weeks. That meant discussions had started long before anyone in the building realized ownership might change. Ethan felt a cold sensation settle in his stomach. He had assumed Darius was an outsider who wandered into the showroom. The reality was becoming far more complicated. Darius opened the portfolio again and reviewed several pages. He paused at one section before nodding slowly. Then he looked directly at Ethan. Not with anger. Not with satisfaction. Simply with calm attention. You seem surprised. Ethan cleared his throat. I just did not realize who you were. Darius considered the answer. That is interesting. The manager shifted uncomfortably. Darius continued. Because I never asked anyone here to know who I was. The words hung in the air. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. I came here as a customer, Darius said. Then I came here as an investor. The reaction was different each time. Several employees exchanged uneasy glances. Ethan stared at the floor. Outside, another luxury vehicle pulled into the parking lot. Through the glass walls, the afternoon sun continued to shine. Inside, however, something had fundamentally changed. The conversation was no longer about cars. It was about character. Darius closed the portfolio once more and handed it back to Richard. Then he asked a question that caused the tension throughout the showroom to rise even higher. Before I make my final decision, tell me one thing. Has the current owner been informed about everything that happened here today? Richard did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the front entrance as though waiting for confirmation. The entire showroom followed his gaze. Outside the glass walls, a black luxury sedan rolled into the parking lot and came to a smooth stop near the entrance. A second vehicle arrived behind it. Employees exchanged uncertain looks. Ethan Whitmore felt the tension building with every passing second. The confidence he had carried all afternoon was beginning to disappear. Richard finally nodded. Yes. The owner was informed. Before anyone could respond, the front doors opened. A distinguished man in his 60s stepped inside, accompanied by 2 advisors. He moved with calm authority, the kind that came from decades of building successful businesses. Several employees immediately recognized him. A receptionist nearly dropped a stack of paperwork. Tyler Brooks stared in disbelief. The man standing in the showroom was Charles Harrington, the majority owner of the dealership group. Ethan straightened his jacket and quickly approached him. Mr. Harrington, I was not expecting you today. Charles offered a polite smile but did not stop walking. His attention remained fixed on Darius Coleman. The showroom grew so quiet that the faint hum of the air conditioning became noticeable. Sunlight reflected across a nearby Ferrari, casting crimson highlights along the floor as Charles crossed the room. When he finally reached Darius, he extended his hand warmly. I apologize for arriving late. Darius shook his hand. No apology necessary. Charles nodded. Richard shared the preliminary findings. I wanted to hear your thoughts personally before anything moves forward. Ethan froze. The word struck harder than any report. Before anything moves forward. It was suddenly obvious that discussions had advanced much further than he realized. Darius looked around the showroom for a moment. Rows of exotic cars gleamed beneath the lights. Customers stood silently beside displays. Employees waited anxiously. The building felt completely different now than it had 1 hour earlier. The facility has potential, Darius said calmly. The inventory is strong. The location is excellent. Several employees deserve recognition. Tyler lowered his eyes, unsure whether his name belonged in that category. Darius continued. But culture affects value. Every customer interaction affects value. Every employee interaction affects value. Charles listened carefully. Ethan felt his throat tighten. He knew exactly where the conversation was heading. Darius was not discussing cars anymore. He was discussing leadership. Charles folded his hands. Do you believe the problems can be corrected? Darius took a slow breath. His gaze moved briefly toward Ethan before returning to Charles. Most problems can be corrected if people are willing to learn from them. The answer was measured and calm. Yet somehow it felt heavier than criticism. Around the showroom, employees remained completely silent. Nobody wanted to miss a single word. Charles nodded thoughtfully. Then I assume you have reached a decision. Darius looked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted the parking lot in shades of gold. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he turned back toward Charles. I have. A wave of anticipation spread through the room. Ethan could feel his pulse quickening. Tyler held his breath. Even customers seemed unable to look away. Darius glanced once more around the dealership before speaking. Tomorrow morning, I want a meeting with every department head. After that, we will discuss the future of this dealership. The silence that followed felt even louder than the laughter that had greeted him when he first walked through the doors. The showroom felt different after that. Nobody rushed to speak. Nobody laughed. The energy that had filled the building earlier had faded into something quieter, heavier, almost reflective. Outside, the sun had begun its slow descent toward the horizon, painting long streaks of amber light across the floor-to-ceiling windows. Those golden reflections stretched across the polished marble and flowed beneath rows of Ferraris, Lamborghinis, McLarens, and Porsches like rivers of light. Darius Coleman stood alone near the center display long after the conversations ended. Charles Harrington and the advisors had stepped into a private office upstairs. Richard was reviewing documents near the reception area. Customers slowly returned to browsing, though many continued glancing toward Darius as if trying to understand the man who had quietly transformed the atmosphere of the entire dealership without raising his voice. Ethan Whitmore remained near the sales offices. For the first time in years, he looked uncertain inside a building where he normally controlled every interaction. The manager stared through a glass wall overlooking the showroom floor. Below him, employees moved carefully through their routines. Yet he noticed something he had ignored for a long time. Nobody seemed relaxed around him. Sales associates became tense whenever he appeared. Conversations stopped. Smiles faded. The realization sat heavily in his chest. Down below, Tyler Brooks approached Darius carrying 2 unopened bottles of water. He offered one carefully. I thought you might want this. Darius accepted it with a grateful nod. Thank you, Tyler. The younger salesman smiled faintly. Most people here never remember names on the first day. Darius looked toward the rows of vehicles glowing beneath the evening light. Names matter. Tyler stood quietly beside him. After a moment, he asked the question everyone else seemed afraid to ask. Did you know what would happen when you walked in here this morning? Darius loosened the cap on the bottle and took a small sip. The cool water reflected the fading sunlight. No, he answered honestly. I knew numbers. I knew reports. I knew market projections. But I did not know people. Tyler considered that. And now? Darius glanced across the showroom. A family was admiring a red Ferrari. A salesman patiently answered questions. Near the service desk, an employee helped an older customer with paperwork. Small moments. Ordinary moments. Yet they revealed character more clearly than spreadsheets ever could. Now I know more than I did this morning. Tyler nodded slowly. The answer made sense even if it was not the answer he expected. Above them, Ethan watched the exchange from the second floor. He could not hear the conversation. Yet seeing Tyler speak comfortably with Darius stirred something uncomfortable inside him. Respect. Genuine respect. Not the kind demanded by a title or position. The kind earned naturally. As the evening continued, the showroom grew quieter. One by one, customers departed. The bright afternoon glare softened into warm orange light. Reflections shimmered across polished body panels and chrome accents. Somewhere in the distance, a cleaning machine hummed softly across another section of the building. Darius looked toward the windows and watched the sunset settle over the parking lot. For several seconds, he said nothing. The silence felt peaceful. Thoughtful. Almost necessary. Tomorrow would bring decisions. Meetings. Changes. Consequences. But tonight, there was only stillness. And in that stillness, hidden beneath the glow of luxury cars and polished glass, truths that had gone unnoticed for years were finally beginning to surface. The next morning arrived beneath a pale gray sky that slowly brightened as sunlight spilled across the dealership's massive glass facade. By 8 o'clock, every department head had gathered inside the second-floor conference room overlooking the showroom. Below them, rows of Ferraris, Lamborghinis, McLarens, and Porsches sat beneath carefully positioned lights, their polished surfaces reflecting the beginning of a new day. The atmosphere inside the room felt nothing like a normal management meeting. Nobody spoke more than necessary. Coffee cups sat untouched. Papers remained neatly stacked. Everyone seemed to understand that something important was about to happen. Ethan Whitmore sat near the far end of the conference table. He had barely slept. The confident certainty that once guided every decision now felt distant. Across from him sat Tyler Brooks, invited unexpectedly after Charles Harrington requested input from newer employees. Tyler still looked surprised to be there. At precisely 8:15, the door opened. Darius Coleman entered alongside Richard and Charles. The room immediately fell silent. Darius carried no display of authority. No expensive accessories. No dramatic entrance. Yet. Every eye followed him as he took a seat near the center of the table. Sunlight streamed through the windows behind him, casting soft reflections across the conference room glass. Richard opened a folder and distributed several documents. The sound of paper sliding across the table seemed unusually loud. Charles folded his hands and nodded toward Darius. The floor is yours. Darius looked around the room slowly. He took time to study every face before speaking. Yesterday was not about numbers. Several executives exchanged uncertain glances. Darius continued. The financial review was completed weeks ago. The market analysis was completed weeks ago. What I needed yesterday could not be found inside reports. Silence deepened throughout the room. Ethan stared at the table. Darius looked toward the showroom below. Customers were beginning to arrive. Sales associates moved through morning preparations. Life inside the dealership continued as usual, unaware that its future was being decided overhead. Businesses do not succeed because of buildings, Darius said calmly. They succeed because of people. Tyler felt a quiet sense of validation hearing the words. Darius turned toward the management team. I spent yesterday observing interactions. Not sales numbers. Not profit margins. Interactions. Several department heads shifted uncomfortably. Darius opened a thin folder and reviewed a page. I observed employees who treated customers with respect regardless of appearance. I observed employees who supported each other. I also observed behavior that damages trust. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. Nobody mentioned his name. Nobody needed to. Darius closed the folder. The strongest businesses are built on consistency. A customer should receive the same respect whether they arrive in a supercar or a pickup truck. Whether they wear a tailored suit or work clothes. Respect cannot depend on assumptions. The room remained completely still. Then came the moment nobody expected. Darius looked toward Tyler. Mr. Brooks. Tyler nearly jumped. Yes, sir. Yesterday, you approached someone everyone else dismissed. Why? Tyler hesitated before answering honestly. Because he looked like a customer who deserved help. Darius smiled faintly. Exactly. Charles nodded approvingly. Several executives exchanged thoughtful looks. For the first time, Ethan fully understood what had happened. The acquisition was never the real test. The real test had begun the moment Darius walked through the front doors. And the people who passed were not necessarily the people with the highest titles. They were the people who chose respect when nobody thought it mattered. The conference room remained silent long after Darius finished speaking. Nobody rushed to defend themselves. Nobody challenged his observations. The truth had settled over the room too completely for arguments. Morning sunlight reflected through the glass walls overlooking the showroom below, casting bright patterns across the polished conference table. Charles Harrington leaned back in his chair and studied the faces around him. Some appeared thoughtful. Others appeared uncomfortable. Ethan Whitmore looked neither angry nor defensive anymore. He simply looked tired. For the first time in years, he was being forced to see himself through someone else's eyes. Darius allowed the silence to remain. Experience had taught him that important lessons rarely arrived through lectures. They arrived through reflection. Eventually Ethan stood. The movement drew every eye in the room. He adjusted his jacket slowly before speaking. His voice lacked the confidence that had once dominated every conversation. I owe this room an apology. Nobody interrupted. Ethan looked toward Tyler first. To the employees I have overlooked. Then toward several department heads. To the people I expected results from without giving enough respect in return. Finally, his eyes settled on Darius. The room grew even quieter. And to you. Darius listened without expression. Ethan continued. When you walked through those doors, I made assumptions before I asked a single question. I judged you based on appearance instead of character. I decided who you were before giving you the chance to speak. The words came slowly, but they sounded genuine. Below the conference room windows, customers continued moving through the dealership unaware that years of habits were being examined overhead. Ethan exhaled carefully. That was my failure. Several executives exchanged surprised glances. Many had expected excuses. Instead they heard accountability. Darius nodded once. Not approval. Not victory. Simply acknowledgement. Ethan looked down briefly before continuing. Yesterday, I thought I was protecting standards. The truth is I was protecting assumptions. The admission seemed to cost him something. Yet once spoken, the tension in his posture eased slightly. Charles folded his hands. Recognizing a mistake is important. Learning from it is even more important. Ethan nodded. I understand. Darius rose from his chair and walked toward the conference room windows. Sunlight reflected across the rows of Ferraris and Lamborghinis below. Their polished surfaces appeared almost motionless beneath the bright morning light. After several moments, he turned back toward the room. People make mistakes. Every person at the table listened carefully. The question is whether those mistakes become walls or lessons. Ethan remained silent. Darius continued. Yesterday could have become an argument. It could have become a confrontation. Instead it became a chance to see something clearly. Tyler watched closely. The younger salesman expected consequences. What he did not expect was compassion. Darius looked directly at Ethan. I did not come here to embarrass anyone. Ethan swallowed hard. Darius spoke calmly. I came here to understand whether this business could become better than it is today. The room remained still. Charles smiled faintly. He understood exactly what Darius meant. This meeting was never about revenge. It was about transformation. Darius returned to his seat and opened a folder containing final acquisition documents. The pages rested quietly beneath his hand. Then he made the announcement everyone had been waiting for. The acquisition will move forward. Effective immediately, we begin building a culture where respect is not earned by appearance. It is given because people deserve it. For the first time that morning, the room seemed able to breathe again. Several months later, the dealership felt transformed in ways that could not be measured on a balance sheet. Morning sunlight streamed through the massive glass walls, washing the showroom in warm gold as reflections danced across rows of Ferraris, Lamborghinis, and McLarens. Customers moved comfortably through the displays, greeted with the same respect regardless of how they looked or what they drove. From the second-floor balcony, Darius Coleman stood quietly overlooking the showroom floor. A simple cup of coffee rested in his hand. Below him, Tyler Brooks was helping a family explore a Ferrari for the first time. His patience and professionalism drew genuine smiles from everyone around him. Nearby, Ethan Whitmore spoke with a customer wearing work boots and a faded jacket. There was no judgment in his expression now. No assumptions. Only respect. Darius watched the interaction in silence. The memory of that first day briefly crossed his mind. The laughter. The challenge. The moment an entire room decided who he was before knowing anything about him. Yet standing there now, none of that seemed important anymore. What mattered was what had come after. Growth. Accountability. Change. Ethan finished helping the customer and looked up toward the balcony. For a moment their eyes met across the showroom. Neither man spoke. They did not need to. The lesson had already been learned. Sunlight reflected across the polished marble floor and climbed the curves of the supercars below. Conversations filled the air. Employees worked together. Customers felt welcome. The dealership was no longer defined by appearances. It was defined by character. Darius took one final look across the showroom before turning away from the window. Behind him, the morning light continued to shine across the cars and the people moving among them. And in that quiet glow, respect had become the most valuable thing in the building.